Good evening, and welcome to the second part of my interview with Robin and Elise, who are from the Katharine Hepburn Cultural Center down in Old Saybrook. If you haven't seen the first part, you really got to do that, and you'll get a lot out of that. And now we're going to go to part two. Yeah, it's going to get really juicy now. All righty. Welcome, Robin and Elise. Thank you for being here. I am so glad you guys made the trek up.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk about her family. Who were her parents? Tell our audience about Katharine Hepburn's parents.
So she had some pretty unique parents, and she adored her parents. She has repeatedly said that she really lucked out where she had two fascinating parents. Her father was a urologist for Hartford Hospital. And he was a surgeon. He was also a campaigner for educating people about venereal disease, which was a very controversial topic in the 1910s, the 1920s.
Yes, yes.
But he thought it was very important. He saw the consequences and the devastation of that.
Yes.
Her mother, Katharine Houghton, she was a well-educated individual. She'd gone to Bryn Mawr College. She was a writer. She wrote pamphlets about women's suffrage, and she was also a campaigner for women's suffrage and for access to birth control. So she helped found the organization that became Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So she had parents who were a little bit left of center for the early 1900s, and her family really imbued in her the idea that you have values and that you stand up for those values.
Did she have siblings?
She did. She came from a large family. So
all right. Tell us about her family.
There were 6 children altogether. Katharine was the second oldest. Her brother Tom was older than her. Then she had her brothers Robert and Richard, and the 2 youngest were Margaret, actually Marion and Margaret in that order. And she was very close to her siblings. Unfortunately, her brother Tom passed away when he was just a teenager. He was her best friend. That was very difficult for her. She obviously thought about him all of the time. She talks about him quite extensively in her autobiography. But she was a bit older than her youngest sisters, and she always felt like the auntie. She would bring them to New York, and she would take them to shows and buy them dresses and really treat them fine. And, you know, she was okay having that role, being in that role. She never had children of her own, but I think she absolutely adored having that large family to go back to all the time. And all of her siblings had children, so then she became the aunt for many other kids as well.
And we know she lost a brother, but what became of her other siblings?
Everyone was quite successful. Robert was a physician, just like his father.
Mm-hmm.
Marion was a historian, a writer. She actually eventually married Ellsworth Grant, who was the mayor of West Hartford, I believe.
Okay, all right.
Peg was a librarian, but also owned a farm. Everyone stayed in Connecticut. And Richard was a playwright, and I think a somewhat wannabe actor from time to time. He actually auditioned for a film that Kate was going to be in. He didn't make the audition, but she thought that was best because he was a fine writer as it was.
The movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? The woman who was Sidney Poitier's to-be wife, her name was Houghton, right?
Yes.
She's connected to Katharine Hepburn. How?
She was her niece. So Marion, Katharine Hepburn's sister, had a daughter who she named Katharine with the same spelling with that A, and that was Katharine Houghton. So Katharine Houghton was Katharine Hepburn's niece.
Wow. And did she leave any writings about working with, was that the first and only time she worked with a family member?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
You know, I believe it was. She certainly encouraged Katharine Houghton to be an actress. We have a few of the letters that were exchanged. I think Katharine Houghton maybe was 10, 11, 12 years old doing school plays. And Katharine Hepburn is writing to her mother saying, this is wonderful. And, you know, I can't wait to see her. She really encouraged her to be an actress. I think that's the only time they appeared together. But Katharine Houghton went on to have a wonderful stage career. She primarily did theatrical work beyond the film, not so much other film work, and she lectures quite frequently about her aunt. She has done a lot of public speaking about Kate.
So the mayor of West Hartford was her father.
Ellsworth Grant. Yeah.
Ah, see, bing, 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 the lights go off. There we go. Ah.
But
okay.
I don't think she wanted to ride on those coattails, which is why she used Katharine Houghton professionally.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Speaking of coattails, how did her fame and fortune impact her family?
That's another good question. I don't think that she wasn't certainly as you said earlier, money didn't mean that much to her, right? And she certainly wasn't someone who cared too much about possessions. She was a frugal person. When Katharine Hepburn retired to Connecticut, she left behind and sold her New York brownstone, which she had had for decades, the same brownstone in New York. And she lived in this, what had been a summer cottage, but she lived year round. It didn't have a lot of frills. It had two sides to the kitchen because she liked to cook the way she liked to cook, and she wanted her brother Richard to be able to cook and stay out of her way. But beyond that, it wasn't, it's not a mansion. You know, it wasn't at the time a mansion for her. It was a comfortable place that the family spent a lot of time at. When she passed on, I think she left something to everyone, but it wasn't the mass of her riches. And we know, because the Kate was just in the very infancy of its planning, at the time she passed, all of her possessions were auctioned off by Sotheby's, and proceeds went to various charities and other things through the estate. It's one of the reasons why the Katharine Hepburn Museum now is constantly looking at things that might come up on auction through private collectors, because her materials had just gone out there to the world through the original auction. So had we existed at the time that she passed, we think we may have received so many other things, but right now we're on the hunt for a lot of them.
Now, we know that you just told us that she never had children. Did she ever marry?
She did. She married shortly after she graduated from college. So she met a man named Ogden Ludlow Smith, who she met while she was in college. And after she graduated, he was still interested, and they got married. They got married in Hartford, and at her parents' house, which is now right across on Bloomfield Avenue, right across from University of Hartford, is the house that her parents owned. She got married in the backyard there. And she had her husband change his name. His name was, last name was Smith. She did not want to be Kate Smith. She didn't think that was a very, extravagant name to have.
Well, tell people, do you know about Kate Smith?
And she was also didn't want to be mistaken for Kate Smith.
Well, the physiques are quite different.
Yes,
yeah, they were. Yeah. So Kate Smith's version of God Bless America is a national treasure.
I think they still play it at Yankee Stadium.
I play it. I play it regularly. So for those of you who don't know, that's who Kate Smith is. So okay, go on.
So
please.
yes, he changed his last name. So he changed his name to he went by Luddy, but he changed his last name to Ludlow. She never used his last name professionally. They moved to New York, where they got this brownstone that she then remained in to the 1990s. But he really supported her in the early years of her acting career. So the late 20s, the early 1930s, while she was really trying to audition and make a name for herself in the New York theater scene. And once she went out to Hollywood in 1932, they separated. He stayed in New York. She went out to Hollywood. And she says that was really the beginning of the end of their marriage, but they remained great friends. So every time she came back to the East and she would go to Fenwick, Luddy was there. Her family loved him. So he was always there hanging around, taking home movie footage that we have in the museum.
Really? All right. Okay.
They officially she got a quickie divorce in Mexico in 1934 and then got an official divorce in 1941. So he went on and married again in the 1940s and had children, but she never married again.
Why did she become an actress?
That's a great question. I don't know why exactly, but I think for her experience, I think is an experience that a lot of actors have, where that was where she felt comfortable. So she had a hard time after her brother Tom died. She was still in high school. She didn't go back to school after that. She was homeschooled. She had tutors come in after that. And then she did go off to college. She went to Bryn Mawr. And her first couple years at Bryn Mawr, she really struggled. She didn't make a lot of friends. She didn't do that well in her classes. At one point, the college administration had a meeting with her parents, and it was kind of, she's got one last chance or we're going to kick her out of school. And so she decided to buckle down, and that was around the time she found theater. So she wasn't a theater major. She was a philosophy and history major. But her junior and senior year, she got involved in theater and just fell in love with it. I think it gave her that opportunity to be somebody different, maybe. So by the time she was graduating from college, she decided she was going to be an actress and she wanted to be a star.
How many Oscars did she win?
She has won 4 Best Lead Actress Oscars, and that is still the record today. And the interesting thing is that there is a decades-long gap between her first Oscar, which is in the 30s for Morning Glory. She doesn't win again until we get to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which is in the 60s. And then the very next year, she won for Lion in Winter. And then eventually in the 80s, she won for On Golden Pond.
I love the scene in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner when she deals with Tilly, and Tilly's in the car. Don't speak, Tilly. Start your car. I love that. And drive. Yeah. And take that yellow thing with you out here. I love that too.
Something I never knew, and we found out by happenstance. She, at one point, was given an honorary degree from Columbia University. And the president of Columbia wrote in his speech about, bestowing this honor on her, that she modeled the character in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner after her own mother. And I never knew that until reading the letter that we have in our collection. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I love the Tilly scene. I really love that, yeah. And I also love the scene where Sidney Poitier tells his dad, I don't care if you carried that mail bag 500 miles. This is my life. You see yourself as a black man. I see myself as a man. Wow. That movie for that period, that was pre-bunkers.
Sure.
My goodness, that was, people flocked to the theaters to really see that.
They embraced it.
They embraced it.
The studio wasn't sure how it was going
Are
to go.
they ever?
Yeah.
I mean, they always worry, but, people are real, and that was going on, and it's still going on. So
sure is.
It was amazing. So we touched on it briefly. What causes did she promote with her fame and wealth?
She, in the 40s, she gave a speech in 1947 at Gilmore Stadium in Los Angeles. And it was part of this rally that was being thrown by the Progressive Party. And it was supposed to be a rally for a presidential nomination for Wallace, who was the Progressive Party candidate. And she went up to give this speech that was likely written by Dalton Trumbo. And she gave this speech that was against censorship. And it was at the time when the House Un-American Activities Committee was ramping up their investigations into Hollywood. So there was
communists.
There was a committee in Los Angeles who was at that time doing interviews.
Blacklisting.
And it was right when they were compiling the Hollywood 10.
Yes.
And so she got up there in a red dress and gave this fiery speech about how, they're coming after the artists, and it's a distraction from the other conditions that are happening in the country at the time, that they're busting unions and that, people of color don't have rights. And she got hammered in the press for it.
Oh, yeah.
So the Progressive Party published this as a pamphlet after her speech with her picture on the cover and distributed it. And the press really, they called her
everything.
a red. They called her.
I love the red dress because that's what they were called. She was like in your face. Here you go, right? That's what that was all about. I love that.
And so she, she got called into Louis B. Mayer's office, who was the head of MGM, and he said, "Kate, why did you give that speech?" She said, "Because someone had to say something." And I thought, that someone should be me. And she offered for him to fire her. She said, take me off the payroll if you need to do that. And he said, well, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, we don't have to go that far. It's still box office.
Yeah, so she did, her movie bombed. She didn't get a role for a year or two after that. So she kind of suffered from that. And she didn't speak out on a lot of causes in the 50s after that.
Yes.
But by the 1970s, she was a big proponent of Planned Parenthood. And so she would do fundraisers for Planned Parenthood.
Her Hartford connection, we touched on it briefly. She was born there,
Yes.
right? Were all of her siblings born there as well, in Hartford?
I believe
Yeah, I
so.
think all of them.
They lived in Hartford for decades.
They did?
Yes.
Okay, so one of their homes is across from the University of Hartford?
Yeah.
Do we know if that home is still standing?
That home is the only one that's still standing.
Ah, okay.
So their first home in Hartford was on Hudson Street, and it was right across from Hartford Hospital at the time. They expanded Hartford Hospital, destroyed that home, so now part of Hartford Hospital stands on top of where that house used to be. They moved to Hawthorne Street, and that was where they were for a good chunk of time when her mother was really working for women's rights, for women's suffrage, where Margaret Sanger used to come and visit and have tea with them. And then they moved to the Bloomfield Street house, which was the house that they had until her father died. And then after her father passed away, she donated that house to the University of Hartford.
Margaret Sanger.
Yeah.
Wow. Can you tell our audience a little bit about Margaret Sanger?
Well, she's was a really important advocate for women's rights, for women's health rights. So she established Planned Parenthood, women's access to reproductive care. And
She got in trouble with the Comstock laws, right? Trying to pass things through the mails or whatever it was.
got in
Birth
trouble with
control.
lots,
She
yeah.
had her issues too. I may
Yeah.
have gotten that wrong, but I know that she didn't have a cakewalk either. Miss Sanger, she did not. The more I listen to you talk about Miss Hepburn, the more fascinating it becomes about her life. Are there any statues or monuments to her anywhere in Connecticut?
Well, certainly there's our museum.
Yes.
Connecticut Historical Society has several things in their collection.
Oh, they do?
Yes. I don't know about a statue per se, but in New York City, near where her brownstone was, there's the Katharine Hepburn Garden, which people can visit. And the Academy Museum, which just opened in Hollywood, has several items that they have on exhibit as well. Her Oscars, unfortunately, are not with us. The Oscars are at the National Portrait Gallery, along with an original portrait by Everett Raymond Kinsler. That's his name. A wonderful artist who painted her several times. Someday, hopefully, we'll have the Oscars at the Cape for a short exhibit.
Favorite Kate Hepburn movie, Elise?
That's a hard one.
It is.
I always say Summertime, and that's partly because she gives a really beautiful performance in it, and also because it takes place in Venice. It's shot by David Lean, and it's just beautifully, beautifully shot, beautifully acted. It's a wonderful story.
Holiday.
Excuse me, what year?
54, 55? I'm not actually sure. It's mid-50s.
Holiday.
Color, so.
Yeah.
Oh, it's in color. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Holiday, what about...
Yeah, Holiday has to be the 30s, I believe. It's a Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn pairing. Those are very popular before it became Hepburn Tracy,
Spencer.
of course. Yeah. But it's just a wonderful movie around New Year's Eve. It's a fun thing to watch with the family. It's comedy, it's drama, it's romance. I love it.
What was her relationship like with Spencer Tracy?
Oh, a loaded question.
Oh, okay.
Mostly what I know of her relationship is what she writes about in her autobiography. So in Me, she writes a couple of chapters about Spencer Tracy, and she talks about how much she truly loved him. And her position was love means that you do things for the other person and not for yourself. And she really, they hit it off on the first film that they did together, which was Women of the Year in 1942. And they had a relationship for the next 26 years.
Wow.
They never really lived together except for in the last years of his life when he was very ill, and she didn't do any projects for 5 years and took care of him. Yeah.
Mm. Wow.
And even when it came to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, she had to forgo some of her compensation, I think as did Stanley Kramer, so they could afford to insure Spencer because he was in such bad health.
He died shortly after that movie, didn't he?
Just within weeks of
well,
when
it wasn't too long
filming.
after that. Yeah. Do you have anything in your museum about Sidney Poitier's comments about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? How did he like working with Miss Hepburn and Spencer? We have anything on that?
I don't know that we have anything in the museum, but I know that he says that he was he admired Spencer Tracy so much as an actor, and that when he had to do this scene where he sits down with them and talks about wanting to marry their daughter, that he was so just starstruck that he forgot his lines. And eventually, Stanley Kramer, the director, said, "Would you like to do your lines without them in the room?" And he said, "Yes, please."
Yes,
So
I did read that
he did
somewhere.
his half of that scene without them there until he sort of got over, okay, I'm acting with.
Who would have thunk that, right?
Right.
Who would have thunk that about Sidney Poitier?
Uh-huh.
All right.
Oh, cool.
What's coming up down at the Kate?
We have a lot. I mean, we have tons of music programs happening. We have everybody from Eric Gales to Curtis Salgado this summer. Big Al Anderson, who's a great Connecticut favorite. Some museum programs.
So we try to switch around things in the museum periodically. So partly we switch the exhibits that have clothing in them every 6 months so that the clothes don't get degraded by the light, but it also makes the museum kind of new and exciting. So over the summer, we're mounting an exhibit about, it's called The Importance of Being Kate in Earnest. So it's about Kate Hepburn working with Ernest Thompson, who is a screenwriter who wrote On Golden Pond.
Oh, boy.
And he also wrote a Broadway play called West Side Waltz that they did together. So we'll have a special exhibit about On Golden Pond and West Side Waltz. We have a program coming up about the hurricane of 1938.
Oh, yes.
Which was a massive hurricane that hit Connecticut, destroyed her house in Fenwick.
Yes.
And we have... on the anniversary of her passing on June 29th, we're showing a documentary about her called All About Me that was made in the 1990s.
Yes. Yes.
So we have lots of things planning.
You know, one of the joys, I'd been trying to get down there to the museum, but with COVID and work schedules, I couldn't. Then spring break came, and I had a couple of days, and we went down, and I could just feel the excitement building in me. As I walked and I saw the bricks with the names and everything. How do you get the artists that you do to come there?
Well, we have a wonderful executive director, Brett Elliott, who still does all of the booking there. And over time, he's just developed these really terrific relationships with artists and agents.
Oh, okay.
It's very important. But when artists perform at the Kate, they often just fall in love with the space, as you mentioned earlier, the acoustics, the feeling of the room, and they want to come back. So we've seen some major names come back to the Kate, like Peter Asher. We have Peter Yarrow, Noah Paul Stuckey coming together. Judy Collins is there every year. So we're very lucky in that it's a wonderful place to perform.
Well, tell him that I would like to see Kebmo.
Oh, yes,
that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, Kebmo's coming. I'm gonna be there.
Okay,
You
I'll let him know.
So ladies, what can I say except the deepest thank you and appreciation for you coming and doing this a labor of love about Kate Hepburn, her life, her movies, her connection to Hartford, and the magnificent legacy that she's left for so many of us to enjoy. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
That's all the time we have for tonight's show. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have learning about the Kate. You know what? Go online and check it out. Maybe there's something there for you. My name is James Ransom Reed Jr. I am the host of What's Your Story? Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, good night.
Sometimes life just happens. Don't worry. Farmington Motorsports will get you back on the road and at a fair price. From towing to tires, emissions to transmissions.
Our ASC certified techs do it all.
Farmington Motorsports is a family-run business. We're a Napa Auto Center and AAA approved. We work on all makes and models from preventative maintenance to major repairs.
And every repair is backed by our 2-year, 24,000-mile nationwide warranty.
When life happens to you, don't worry. Farmington Motorsports.